Hi, and welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm Angie McCabe, CEO and co-founder of Intuity Performance. I'm a performance coach, HR professional, whole person leadership facilitator, and your host. The Human Side of Business podcast is fueled by the genuine curiosity to understand how personal characteristics and skills can be leveraged to drive individual and team performance, tangible outcomes, and ultimately organizational success within business. Each podcast is devoted to sharing knowledge, expanding our learning edges, and exploring the trends in corporate culture towards growing the emotional intelligence of organizations. I'm so glad you're here.
Okay, and I'm so excited to be here with you today, Dr. Lillian. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. I'd like to do the formal introduction and then we can dive right in if that's okay.
That sounds great.
For sure. So I'm proud to announce Dr. Lillian Schumacher on the Elevate Business podcast. And Dr. Lillian has been appointed as the first woman president in the 136-year history of Tiffin University in Ohio back in 2016. She realized that celebrating cultural uniqueness initiative and TU's Center for Intellectual Excellence. Her continued focus for Tiffin University remains to strategically position Tiffin University for sustained success in today's ever-changing world of higher education, to transform the institution in areas of global mindset through comprehensive diversity and inclusion institutional identity, and to become a model example of strategic private higher education innovation through expansive alliance with other universities, consortiums, and organizational partnerships. With over 35 years of experience in higher education and corporate environments, she is well equipped to accomplish just that. She's an author, consultant, and speaker on topics including global leadership, organizational strategy, innovation and change, and an executive coach specializing in cultural and emotional intelligence, and DISC, which is a fave of mine as well. She has done extensive consulting with both national and international companies. Dr. Lillian holds a doctorate in leadership studies, a master's in organizational development, and a master's in higher education administration, all from Bowling Green State University. She earned her bachelor's degree in economics from Allegheny College. Is that how you say it?
Allegheny College.
Allegheny College in
Yep.
Meadville, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Welcome. So glad that you're here with us.
Thanks, Ange. Thank you. I appreciate it. And just FYI, I know, sometimes the Canadian accent might, play into this, but it's Tiffin University, just FYI. So it's Tiffin
Thank
University.
you so much, Tiffin.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Tiffin University.
T-I-F-F-I-N. Yes, tongue in cheek there. So yeah, so happy to be with you today. Thank you for that introduction.
Yes. Let's dive in. I'm so interested to get your experiences and perspectives around leading or managing up. I know that it's a question I often get from clients, especially on one-on-one coaching, as to like, how do we do this? Like, how do we even navigate that landscape in our workplaces?
Yeah, so that is a very broad and difficult question, right, to answer. And so I guess I'll start with just a couple thoughts. So I think it's rare that in any role, an individual works with a boss that they would deem perfect, or they have the best relationship with, or they feel potentially that this is the easiest person they could ever talk with or share their ideas with or their perspectives with. If you have that, that's rare and that's wonderful. But more often than not, like any relationship, it takes relationship development and it takes time. And when there's that direct report kind of subordinate relationship, I think it adds that extra layer of complexity, because managing up is something that I think is still pretty new to a lot of individuals, especially those that are younger in their profession, right? And so, but it is such an important, especially as the dynamics of the professional workplace, no matter what industry changes, right? So most leaders today are results oriented. They're focused. they move super fast. They're going from one thing to the other. So sometimes the leader won't necessarily be as like laser focused in on the employee as maybe he or she should be, right?
Right.
There might not be as much time for, individual one-on-one time, communicating maybe as effectively and comprehensively as one needs to. So, just given the dynamic of the job itself, managing up is a wonderful skill to be able to develop and utilize in a working environment. And so I highly, highly encourage people to learn that skill as early as possible in their careers, right? And so what does that really mean? What does it mean to manage up? And so I think, there needs to be an opportunity to really kind of set the stage for an individual who wants to manage up with their respective boss, okay, to say, I'd really like to be able to do this with you. Are you okay if we have opportunities for me to have conversations with you where I need more clarity, or I may ask you questions to get a particular perspective, or I may do things in a way that may seem a little unconventional, and see if that there's a willingness there, because I think that's important, because then you can decide what strategy of managing up you want to use, right? So, and if it's that seamless, that's wonderful, right? So do I have the ability to say, and I really didn't understand what you wanted my expectations to be in this particular product or project. May I ask you a few questions related to that? That's, one kind of very, really what's expected in a boss subordinate relationship, right? But what if you have, a conflict or a challenge with your boss, and you need to figure out a way to manage up there? What if that boss is micromanaging you to the point that's making you feel uncomfortable? Then there might be a different style of managing up that one would want to try. I'll pause there and see if you have any comment, and then
I appreciate you, Lillian. So for me, I guess what was coming up was a few things. One is hearing you that earlier than later in our careers, we need to learn the skill set of managing up to be effective in our roles and for the potential of progress within that particular company or organization, to say, generally speaking. I'm also hearing great information around what skill sets are needed to manage up. So, managing those expectations, and it's two-way. So it's making sure that you clearly understand your leader's goals, so you can be on the same page, and then also understanding their expectations of a project or a task when you get down to the granular things. What really piqued my interest was the last thing that you had said. If you're feeling micromanaged or uncomfortable in that leader, team member, or subordinate relationship, then there's a different approach. So tell us, what could that look like? Like, how can you, I hate to use the word gingerly, but I mean, so from a place of respect and humility, right?
So it's complicated, but I think one of the ways to have the most success in that kind of dynamic is understanding your boss. Okay, so this is where something like DISC or emotional intelligence can really help. So taking a minute to understand your boss. So is your boss autocratic? Is your boss, results oriented? Is your boss, a micromanager to the point that he or she may be challenged in the way you potentially address them about a particular situation? So you need to meet your boss where he or she is what I mean by that. And so I do think you need to take some time to find out, how self-aware is your boss from your perspective? Okay, so if I say to my boss, I'm really having a problem with this, and so, I'd like to talk to you about it. Is your boss going to get defensive? Is your boss going to get, is your boss going to be open to that? So I think understanding your boss's style is the best place to start, because then you adapt your style to having that conversation with them. So can you be direct, right? Can you not? The other thing that's really important is whenever you want to manage up, I think it's really important that you authentically want to make sure that you're trying to develop a win-win relationship. So you're trying to make it easier on your boss, right? And this isn't challenging. This is trying to make it easier on that person so that the two of you are on the same page and the synergy's there. And that you're trying to make it easier on yourself by removing whatever challenge or obstacle that there is, right?
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, so I think it's hard. And I think sometimes, especially if that relationship is new and you're going to try managing up for the first time, okay, like in the micromanaging situation, I think you might have to try a few different strategies. So, let's play it out for a minute. So if we have a very micromanaging boss, you perceive that to be very micromanaging, then, and you have a very first initial conversation with that person, and you're my micromanaging boss, then I would say to you, Ange, could you and I set up a time to talk? I have a couple questions about some of the things that I'm doing in my role, and I'd like to set aside some time for you to be able to,
Absolutely.
for us to be able to discuss. Okay. And then I'd like to be able to talk to you about something that is creating some frustration and some stress for me, but I want to make sure that you're open to this. And so, may I have this conversation with you, and tread lightly, right, to make sure you understand what the reaction is. And then, assuming that this person would say yes, then, you would say, I want you to know that I, really enjoy this role that I have. I really feel like I've got this. And that, I want you to know and have faith in me that I am going to make you and this project and our organization look really good as a result of this project. And I will give you my word that I will reach out to you if I have issues, but I'm going to ask if you would just give me the opportunity and the space to kind of own this. And knowing that if I need direction or I need support, I will come back to you. Allow me to do that with you. So that could be a way that you could address that in a mutually beneficial, non-threatening way.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And two things that come up for me. One is, what would it look like if there was a proactive approach? So even before this type of scenario happens, as part of leaning into managing up, what would it look like to ask your direct supervisor to be like, hey, if the pace of work isn't going the way that I expected or you expected, what's the best way to approach that with you? So it's almost like, I guess what's coming up for me is in the induction perspective or the onboarding perspective of that team member, them giving, I guess the leader would have to lead that meeting, but they would say, hey, look, like, here's what expectations means. And being very vulnerable, even and transparent. As a leader, we all have triggers, right?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it. I had a boss when I was younger, and you would never, ever, ever go to them and ask them anything on Mondays. But you could Friday afternoons.
Yes.
And it's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. It was just a thing with that boss. And that's how you organically navigated it. But how I believe trust and engagement would build so much faster if us as leaders would lead those types of conversations initially. But I agree with you. Oftentimes it comes in the post manner where you're in that situation, you have to have that first conversation. The other thing that was coming up for me was, what if even instead of identifying what you need, you're asking the leader things like, what will it take for me to build trust? Because I think what was coming up for me was, as a leader myself, if I'm onboarding someone to Intuity Performance, I may be a bit more, I'm definitely the coach approach, like visionary leader type person, and micromanaging is the opposite. I need to manage more. However, hypothetically speaking, if someone comes into the organization, I'm going to be a bit more hands-on with them than if I know what they can do, obviously, right? So I'm just kind of thinking about it from two sides of the coin as to how can we comfortably navigate a true win-win when we're brand new employees. So I think the employee has to have a little bit more self-awareness as to, they may feel micromanaged. Maybe they need to do some fact finding to figure out, is it trust building or are they really being micromanaged? If it's a latter, then for sure, have that conversation. But I'm wondering if there's a bit more discovery conversation that could happen first before having the, hey, this is what I need to do my work productively.
That is an excellent point. And yeah, I should have clarified that more explicitly. When I was talking about understanding and meeting your boss where he or she is, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that does take time, right? And so that ability to manage up is going to take time. You can't do that, you can't do that without knowing your boss, doing some due diligence and some assessing around when is a good time to have that conversation. Is it on a Friday afternoon as opposed to a Monday morning, right?
Right.
And so before you do that, there is a lot of exploration, assessment, due diligence, if you will, that you need to do before you make yourself vulnerable in that space. Because you will be putting yourself in a vulnerable position. To your point, effective leaders make sure that they open that conversation so that they make it an opportunity for, for a collaborative experience as opposed to, but what if that person doesn't? What if that person isn't that type of person, right? I think there needs to be that gift of being able to manage up. And again, manage up for mutual benefit. Right? Mutual benefit. So positioning it and it sounds a little bit, I really, I'm a huge advocate of emotional intelligence because emotional intelligence really looks at self-awareness first, right? So how aware am I of my own triggers, my own areas of emotional self-control, my own ability to self-reflect, and those pieces. But it's also about empathy and relationship management with the people that I work with. And so that means that you understand that individual that you're talking about. And in this relationship that we're talking about, that means you understand your boss. And so before you can engage in a managing up relationship, you have to understand your boss, right? to do so without that understanding is not gonna work.
No, absolutely not. And honestly, Dr. Lillian, I want to put it out there to our subscribers. I did not pay you to talk about emotional intelligence. It just organically happened. And I want to add that you're spot on in the sense that as an organization, I think it's our responsibility to educate our team members more on the soft skills so that they can have those proactive moments instead of sitting in a place of fear and disliking their job without having any form of conversation, which normally takes place, right?
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
And if as I think about it, just for our audience's purposes, I don't know, a very pragmatic maybe exercise is you think about, all right, a particular situation, what do you want the outcome to be, right? And then literally write this down. So you want the outcome to be XYZ, and then, okay, what does that mean for you? And what does that mean for your boss? And, by writing that down, you're actually creating a game plan and then potentially a script to have that conversation with your boss. Again, after you've done the exploration of really, really knowing what approach to use with that person.
Absolutely. And how would you identify, because there's ebbs and flows with all relationships, regardless of if we're at work or in our personal lives. So let's just fast forward a couple years, and this new person has been with their boss for, 2.5 years now. Great relationship. They had that difficult conversation or courageous conversation around the micromanagement. Everything has been going really, really well. And then there's a change in that leader's life that changes their behavior in the workplace. And, maybe they're a bit more snippy or overexcitable. So how do you bring back, or what would you recommend around maintenance conversations? Because we're humans, we slip, things happen, right?
Absolutely. Yep. If the relationship is as you described, it sounds to me like there is some trust there. And so I think, and I've done this before, I would with somebody who's had a trauma or some sort of, experience in their life that's really changed the way they manage or they lead. Just to say, I'd love to set up a time to talk to you. Can you and I, grab lunch one day or grab some coffee, and then just say, is everything okay? Is everything okay with you? Just wanted to check in, I hope everything's going okay. It seems like your style's a little different, right? The way you're leading has changed a bit. Is there anything I can do to be supportive? Is there anything I can do to provide support and or to reinforce anything that's going on within your span of control, and be helpful, kind of that that empathetic approach is what I would take. And that person may or may not open up, but more than likely that person, if they don't open up fully, would say, I really appreciate that. No, everything's okay. I really appreciate you checking in on me, but we're good. And at least that's gonna, give the leader an aha moment to say, oh, wow, maybe I need to self-check. Maybe maybe there's something different about the way I'm leading, and I need to just take a minute and reflect on that. Because in that dynamic, it sounds like that person the boss might be self-aware. Yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen it in past. I'd like to understand your experiences where the boss is extremely friendly with the team member. So, they may be stepping out after work for beers with a group of people, like totally platonic, what I'm getting at. But sometimes you can move into a gray area when you spend over 80% of your time in the workplace and you have an amazing boss. Why wouldn't you want to go to the pub or that kind of watering hole after work occasionally? So when you're looking at leading up or managing up, and it's the flip side of the coin where it's like they're super close and it's almost like a friendship per se, what type of, I guess, boundaries should still stay in place under your thought process or approaches from a leadership perspective? And the second part that was coming up for me is like, how do you navigate that so that you can keep the balance? Because of course we want to have connection in the workplace, but still be able to reach objectives and stretch ourselves.
That is really tough. I think it depends on the person, but there are very few people that can separate friendship from work. So there have been several situations as I have climbed the organizational ladder where, because I'm authentically friendly, I'm authentically kind of what you see is what you get. The challenge is if those boundaries are not in place, in some cases, the people you work with may have expectations that are no longer based on their performance.
I see you.
Okay. So, and that's gonna not end well. So I always tell my cabinet, for example, that when you get to a certain level in the organization, unfortunately, you have to draw a very, very deliberate boundary. And unfortunately, the higher you climb, the lonelier it is. And you have to really make sure that your relationships are professional and stray away from social. It's tough. It's really hard, but depends on the environment you're in, depends on the community you live in, right? But I will tell you, I've lost a lot of friends because of that dynamic, right? Because I think as a result of that relationship, if something goes bad and the leader then has to make a really tough decision, unfortunately, I've lived through a lot of those, and that really can end friendships. It's tough, right? Because the leader isn't trying to do it to be personal or to hurt or to harm, and it stinks. It sucks. You never want to be in that position. But the reality is, at some point in time, it's probably going to happen, right? There's going to be a tough decision that has to be made, and so if those boundaries aren't drawn, it gets really messy. And so I think people need to be reminded of these boundaries often, if there is a choice to socially engage. And in some industries, I think it happens more, in some situations, I think it happens more. But, my cabinet and I talk about this all the time that, you can have, a drink with somebody after work, one, and that's it. Then you leave, right? You don't stay for what turns into a social kind of event or evening. You need to just make sure you really, really draw that boundary. And it stinks, right? And you as a leader needs to know where you can engage and the people that you can be with and who your safe zone people are, because you're going to be looked at 24/7 and, oh my gosh, this person favors this person, because you can tell because they chum around together and they go together. And sometimes like a CEO and a vice president might be really close and they do a lot of things together. That's okay, so long as those boundaries are really, really drawn. And that's a unique situation to have that happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's messy. It's very messy because, you know, I say this all the time. People are messy and human behavior is messy and complex, right? And yeah, I think we all want to feel connected and, you know, friendships are important. But the level of friendship, you know, when it goes from professional to personal is where all those devil in the details come. And that's where you just have to be really careful.
I see you. I see you. And so what advice would you give for our growing leaders out there who are currently peer-to-peer within the organization and the really, really strong connections, you know, they go to Wine Wednesdays, et cetera, and they're up for a promotion maybe.
Mhm.
What is the first step that you would identify is necessary to amicably create those boundaries?
There has to be a sit down. There has to be a sit down and say, you know, there has to be an authentic conversation around, you know, this is probably going to be hard for us, but you and I need to talk about, you know, our personal relationship and our professional relationship and almost have, I mean, I've seen people do this, almost have a professional relationship contract or agreement, right? Where you write down and say, yeah, where it's actually, the boundaries are literally written down. You know, it depends on the dynamic of those peers and then what happens when one gets elevated over the other. But yeah, and that's happened to me personally as well. And so having minimally a conversation where people understand the boundaries and the expectations. So as a leader, especially in that dynamic, the leader needs to communicate her expectations of that changed relationship professionally, right?
Right.
And then the subordinate or whatever in that case needs to make sure that she or he understands that, and the leader needs to make sure that that person understands that, right? So, you know,
Absolutely.
let me hear, Ange, what you think that we've decided on here, because our relationship is important to me, and I want to make sure we do all we can to make this work. But this dynamic is going to be confusing and it's going to get complicated. So what do you think this relationship looks like here? What did you hear me say? I mean, literally ask so that you're both on the same page.
I enjoy where you're going with that, Dr. Lillian, because you're really reflecting back and forth to each other throughout that conversation. So you're holding space, reflecting back and forth, and making sure that it's a joint agreement, whether it's verbal or written,
Exactly.
to prevent some of that quote unquote messiness.
Yeah, exactly right.
I think that's amazing. And what advice would you give to peer leaders? So you spoke about your cabinet a little bit in the sense of, you know, throwing out there a few anecdotal parts about how to lead up and also create those boundaries. As, you know, as the president at TU, how do you lead your leadership team to make sure that they're having positive boundaries and setting the stage that they can be mentored or not mentored, excuse me, managed up?
That's really good. So we take some time several times a year. We have, you know, meetings every week, you know, our cabinet meetings every week. And we usually will start, I mean, we do something pretty simple. We usually start with a reflection around our guiding principles. So we created guiding principles to really drive our strategic planning process when I first became president. And so each cabinet member takes a turn and provides a reflection at the beginning of the meeting. So when we do that, we always use that as an opportunity to be self-reflective as a leader, right? So we actually do that exercise pretty every week when we actually have a meeting, which is good. So to get into that discipline of practicing a time where you can be self-reflective to talk about that, right? So, you know, let's just take a minute and breathe, because our month has been ridiculously busy. And you know what? Did I give all my direct reports the time that they needed? So if I'm really focused on effective communication as our value, how effective have I been, and how much have I been there for my team? And so we'll literally do exercises like that. So I mean, that's, you know, if you want to be an effective leader, it is like anything else. You have to practice the behaviors every day. And as much as you can do that, whether it's like that example that I gave you, continuing to read about what effective leadership is and how you behave and how, you apply emotional intelligence or whatever it is that, you believe is effective leadership.
Right.
Emotional intelligence is it. I'm just telling you that. Just FYI, trust me, emotional intelligence. So if you need any, I mean, it is because it starts with you first, and if leaders could all start with themselves first and really challenge themselves
Yes.
to be as self-aware as possible,
Yes.
a lot of these other things that we're talking about are going to take care of themselves, right? And so that's something we talk about a lot as well at my level, is how self-aware are we and how open are you to allowing your people to come to you and say, I need 5 minutes of your time and I need to have a very difficult conversation with you, right? Are you open to that? Yeah. And what triggers you so that you're not going to be open to that, or those types of things. And so I think you have to practice, you have to read about it, you have to be self-reflective, you have to, try different exercises. And so we talk about it. I mean, we also have retreats, we try to do retreats once a year. Honestly, we don't always do them. Retreats that are focused on something professionally for us.
Right.
We also want to make sure we do retreats where we have some fun together and, get away from the office to try to just really bond in a leadership way. But, I think it's important to do professional retreats where you actually, can spend some time on self-reflection and professional development for your own, longevity as an effective leader. I believe, by the way, in executive coaches. I mean, I do it, and I also have one, right? And so I believe that, it's like anything, we need to continue to work on ourselves and, be challenged to say, are we truly, are we truly the effective leader that we think we are? Right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And so there's a lot to unpack there, which I enjoy. And it's really about, when you're leading from the top, it's ensuring that your continuous conversations are actually habitual. So it's not just once a quarter, or with your OKRs per se, but rather it's systematic, and it's, every week, every other day, you're getting your leaders to think about, am I reflecting? Am I showing up for my team members? How am I growing as a leader? What's my leadership why, per se, right? And I love all of that. And I'm also hearing you say, I can only lead as far as I've been led. Therefore, I have my own executive coach to push me and to be able to call out my own kind of blind spots. I was going to cuss, but my own blind spots.
That's awesome. Yep. That's funny. Well, I mean, that's why every leader should work with an individual like yours in your organization, right? Because think about it. The one, I have had the gift to be able to study leadership. Right. I mean, that's my doctorate, right? That's my where my terminal degree and my research and practice is focused. But most of us don't do that when we get put in leadership positions, right? No. So we might know our particular, trade or industry well, but we are not necessarily trained or educated on how to be an effective leader. Yet that's, yet you're put in these positions. And so this art and this ability to work on yourself so you can be your best self as the leader of the organization. I mean, everybody. I mean, that should be a requirement, but it isn't. Right? It really should be a requirement, but it isn't.
You are.
Yeah. Yeah. It really should be, but that's the problem. It isn't. And so, people don't know what they don't know. And, it's, again, it's, in Goleman, one of Goleman's first, Daniel Goleman, and his work on emotional intelligence, one of the first things he says in his book about emotional intelligence, and it's repeated in several of the books that him and his team have reached afterwards, but written afterwards. And I love this, is that the emotional intelligent leader practices leadership like a golfer does. Okay. And I love this analogy, and it really resonates with me. So you think about, and I'm a horrible golfer, but I really want to become a good golfer, because a lot of business happens on the golf course, right? Yep. Well, I'm not going to get good at it. I'm not going to even be okay at it unless I practice. And so the analogy that they use is that, an effective leader, an effective golfer will use different golf clubs depending on the situation, right? Depending on if they're going to hit the ball far, if they're going to hit it out of the sand, if they're going to hit it out of the water, if whatever they're going to do, right? And that's what he says about emotional intelligence, that it's like a golfer. You use different golf clubs for different situations, depending on the person you're working with or the person you're interacting with. And oh, by the way, if I'm going to be really good at deciding which golf club to use, depending on the situation, I need to practice. I need to practice over and over again. And that's what leaders need to do to be effective. They just do. That's what individuals should do if they want to be effective in their roles.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When you were speaking, a coaching client of mine in past, it kind of popped up in my mind, and we laughed, I would say, for a good 5 minutes, because they had said, and just to paint the context, their leadership tenure was 15 plus years, higher up echelons within this organization that was quite large. They knew their stuff, extremely intelligent, and the way that they spoke was beautiful. I was envious in the way that the words had just flown and in describing, what's coming up for them from a leadership perspective. All this to say, we found ourselves, as part of the coaching conversation, of course, keeping it confidential and respect for the client, but we found ourselves down this avenue of discussing just that. Why isn't there leadership development for leaders within organizations? Why isn't that something that's mandatory and distilled? And so one of the anecdotal things that this person said to me that was, caused a lot of comic relief going there forward in our coaching relationship is, it's like half my brain is this professional leader, and the profession that I'm in, I can do that orientation or that task really, really well. And then the other half of my brain is just like a little kid. Like, my little kid obviously has like tantrums and like meltdowns and breakdowns, and I can't show that to anybody, but that's what's going on in my head as a leader.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I thought it was absolutely comical, but it's so true, because we're not taught about things like how to manage up. And then, by the way, there's like 5 or 6 core skill sets that you need to understand even to manage up. And the culture of your organization needs to be psychologically safe. Like, who talks about this stuff? There's not
Exactly right. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep,
absolutely. I have one more question for you. I know that you're busy, Dr. Lillian. So, or a couple more questions, I should say. I lied. One thing that was coming up for me was, when we're thinking about influencing our team members, all of our team members have their own stuff in their backpack, good, bad, and indifferent. So what happens if you have a team member and they're not comfortable with managing up? Like, they don't feel safe because of past experiences that they've had, maybe. So how do you help that team member undo that stuff so that therefore they can move out of like a stress mindset into more of an innovative mindset and being open to have those conversations?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different, there are a few different ways, I guess, to approach that. I think one of them could be, finding somebody, if it's not you directly, but maybe finding somebody where that employee feels safe to role play with. I know it may sound silly, but it's true, right? So if I don't feel comfortable talking directly or managing up directly to my boss because I'm worried about the result of that, maybe I can try it on somebody I feel safe with, psychologically safe with, right? And at least role play that, and then provide feedback.
Yes.
Right. And so, so whoever that person is, role play with somebody that you do feel safe with, and then allow that person to give you some feedback or some pointers on maybe how you could handle that differently, or change your wording, or, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. So,
Right.
and I think role playing with somebody who you feel comfortable with is a really good way to try to do that. The other thing that we've done is there's been a conversation where one person will kind of be there as the, call it the mediator, but maybe it's just the third person that wants to bring the two together, right? And so, especially in my role, if I'm changing, if I'm changing one of my vice presidents so that now a new person is reporting to them, and this person had a good relationship with me, for example, maybe what I do is I sit the 3 of us down and I actually kind of build that bridge, right? of expectation. And that's a way to be able to do that. And I make the suggestion that, this is going to be a new relationship. Here's my suggestion to you. I would sit down and I would talk about your expectations, and I would talk about your expectations. And if your employee is, comes up against a frustration or an obstacle, what is going to be the best way for him to manage up to you? How would you prefer that happen?
Right.
What kind of approach would you use? I mean, so having somebody that can kind of come and really be the mediator in a conversation like that, I think I've done that before, and it's actually worked out pretty well. Because it's almost like
brilliant.
You're a neutral party. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's brilliant. And I almost believe that organizations, especially in the academia world, it would be beneficial if that was systematic, right? Like if there was the expectation to have, an offboarding, onboarding meeting type thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Dr. Lillian, tell me, what type of leadership legacy do you want to leave for TU?
Well, I think, I definitely, my institution is one that has been strong through its entire existence. We also have an amazing opportunity to be even stronger. And so what I've tried to do is I've tried to remember what has gotten us here and what has, been the reason for our success to date, and then build on it. So it's a matter of, taking the strengths and continuing to build on that. And so when I leave, I mean, I think most people see me as very authentic, and I want that to really, really be how people remember me, that, she really did, what she said is really what she meant, that she was very transparent. Little sidebar, there have been situations where my authenticity and my transparency has come back to bite me. And so one of the things, I mean, just because people can be mean and just the world in which we live in. And I think it gives leaders pause to say, am I going to still be that same person? Am I going to maybe be vulnerable to, that kind of situation or not? And I think that's something every leader has to figure out.
Absolutely.
I can't really be any other way. I've tried it, and I just can't. And so I want people to know that, leadership is hard, but when you surround yourself with really good people, you can pretty much accomplish anything you want to. And I will tell you, and we are at a place after 8 years in my role as presidency here, where I so genuinely believe that. And I want to be able to now take whatever years are left that I plan to be in this role and take it to that exceptional level and leave it for the next person to take on wherever I'm leaving off. But I want it to be from the heart. I mean, we are in an industry where we transform lives through education.
Right.
I mean, and it's a calling, it's a passion. I mean, the pay isn't like it is in the corporate world. So people that decide to be in education and higher education are doing it. Most people are doing it because it's a calling, right? And they really want to make a difference. And so that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to take the strengths that we have and perpetuate those, and even kind of maybe put them on steroids a little bit. and I never want to lose, the foundation of what our organization has always been. And that has been, challenging conventional wisdom. That has been an organization that believes in without risk, there is no gain, and genuinely trying to bring people along in that process. And I want people to remember that about this institution and be really, really proud of the work that we've done. Yeah.
Amazing. You should be proud of the work that you're doing. You sound like a force, Dr. Lillian, and I'm so honored to be able to speak with you today on our podcast, and wishing you the rest of the week to be fabulous for you and the team.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for giving me this opportunity, Ange. It's been wonderful. I've loved talking with you.
Likewise. Take good care.
Yes, you too.
Thanks for listening to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm glad you could join us. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay updated with our latest content, make sure to visit our website. The link can be found in the episode description, where you can subscribe to the podcast, sign up for our newsletter, and learn more about our whole person leadership services. Sounds interesting? Explore the Whole Person Leadership Cohort by Intuity Performance, a unique program that offers unparalleled support to managers on every step of their leadership journey. Our program features evidence-based assessments, workbooks, group coaching, and interactive learning experiences to help you level up your leadership skills. Reach out today to apply to one of our upcoming cohorts. Until next time, take care and stay curious.